Putin started off this conference saying that the Cold War is a thing of the past. He's hoping for peaceful relations between Syria and Israel. That was interesting that was said. He voiced concern over the U.S. leaving the JCPOA and that Russia would never interfere in internal U.S. policies. He's willing to cooperate in the investigation. On the other hand, Trump, of course, said that there was no collusion. That it was utter nonsense. One of them basically agrees that there's no collusion. And Trump said that Putin is also helping Israel on the Syria issue. Let's start with you, Mohammad. What's your take from this? And what do you think about the things that were said specifically, I think, when it comes to our region and Syria? Did they reach any agreement there?
Maybe, but not yet. Keep in mind that there are still more meetings to be held, and those meetings will have President Trump's advisors and counselors in attendance. So yes. It's going to be definitely different, and the tone and the approach will be quite different. But I'm a little bit surprised from Mr. Putin's statement saying that maybe Israel and Syria could have some sort of a peaceful future between the two of them, given that they are still technically at war.
Right.
But given also the kind of relationship that President Putin has with, or Russia has with Syria, I don't think that President Putin speaks without knowing what he's talking about. I don't think that he doesn't have an idea of what the future is going to be in Syria. I think this is one way to ensure and assure Israel that Syria at this time, and maybe even in the future, isn't an enemy to Israel's security, isn't someone that will destabilize Israel. Therefore, maybe a message to Israel that they should stop their airstrikes or alleged airstrikes and attacking. Many of them Israel has acknowledged that give the Syrian military a chance to retake and exert its control over the entire territory in Syria. And that will not really jeopardize Israel's security. But he also spoke about Iran, and he talked about how that Russia is not in agreement with the U.S. regarding withdrawing from the Iran nuclear agreement.
He definitely said it almost like if it was a bad idea. He voiced his concern over the United States leaving the JCPOA. I think that is something that has been talked about privately between the two leaders, and it will be discussed again. But given that President Trump has in his national security staff John Bolton, and his Secretary of State is Pompeo. Those are hardliners, and they don't view Iran and Syria and even the situation in the region in the same way that Russia sees it. But I do believe, and I'm even more inclined now to say that President Trump is more in agreement on so many different issues with President Putin than he is with his own staff. Do you think so?
Do you agree with that, Bianca? Well, yes, and now that we're talking about agreeing and disagreeing, really it was very interesting that they very much agreed on the fact that there was no collusion. Trump just took that and he mentioned it before, and it's so interesting because just, what was it, a few days ago, he said, what can I do? The only thing I can ask him is, did you do it? And don't do it again. But those two things are very, very different, right? So right now they're agreeing to agree on this, and then they're agreeing to disagree on Ukraine. They agreed to disagree.
Intelligence. You know, this is something that President Trump must answer to when he gets back, probably even before getting back to the U.S. How could you criticize the FBI and the U.S. intelligence that is held in high regards, especially in the Republican Party, and not only with any leader? Those are not U.S. allies.
Well, we know that Donald Trump is having a big battle with the FBI. I mean, he just mentioned
but to criticize them with Putin.
Yes, okay.
Be in agreement on that with Putin is unbelievable.
Putin, did you do that? Putin said, no. Me? Of course not. And he believed him.
Wasn't it amazing, though?
And it was amazing because
the body language of Putin, and Putin actually seemed
visibly
angry. It says utter nonsense. There was no collusion.
Well, that settles it then. There was no collusion whatsoever. No matter what the evidence are, no matter what what the professionals are saying. If Putin said so, then he said so. It's quite ridiculous because Putin also said, he answered to one of the journalists, what makes you think that I trust Trump or he trusts me? But we heard Trump saying, I trust him. I trust him. But Putin said, I don't trust him. I don't believe him. I have my own country's interests.
The Russian
interests to uphold, and this is where my allegiances are.
That's the right answer of any president.
But Trump, in that sense, as if there are no American interest at all. Only what Putin says is true.
He wants to be friends with Putin?
Desperately.
Yeah,
okay, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk.
Such a big. He's a strong man, and Trump
likes that.
Strong. He likes that. Okay, I want to go now to Helsinki, where we're joined by our correspondent Jordana Miller. Jordana, you're there in Helsinki covering this summit. What are you hearing? What are the reactions to this? As we mentioned here on our panel, there seems to be a lot of agreement on many issues between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Basically, it looks like it all went well.
About the direction that they both thought. Well, there's probably, Ami, a gasp going through the intelligence agencies back in Washington. I mean, it was hard not to see that President Trump seemed to be on Putin's side in this issue of whether or not Putin meddled in the U.S. elections. He said, I have confidence in both, but then he said, well, Putin very forcefully denied it. It was a strong denial that seemed to get some credence from Trump, and he essentially said he doesn't see why Putin would have meddled in this, and he went on a tangent about why the FBI doesn't have those servers, referring to Clinton's servers, and then he went off again on the FBI. So this was a very strange moment, I think, for certainly people who've been covering politics and the American president. Even the fact that President Trump somehow endorsed Putin's idea that the Americans should share the intelligence, their work on tracking down the Russians with the Russians. This is something, of course, not a new tactic by Putin. We saw during the poisoning of those spies allegedly poisoned by Russia that Russia asked for some of the evidence to be given to Russia, and that was refused. Here, Putin seems to think somehow he's convinced Trump to do the same with this investigation into his own country's meddling in the U.S. elections. Incredible to see.
Okay. Jordana Miller, we'll be back with you in a few minutes. Stick around. Thank you very much for that. I want to ask you, Tammi, of course, a lot of people here in the Middle East are watching this summit very closely, and I'm sure Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at his residence on Balfour Street here in Jerusalem. How do you think he saw this press conference and what was said specifically about Israel? Trump saying that we're all going to work together to help Israel and maybe even help Syrian people.
Well, Netanyahu can surely use this part of, at least of the press conference, to say, look at me, I'm great at public relations and foreign relations for Israel. Look what I did. The United States president is meeting with the Russian president, and he's talking about helping Israel, saving Israel, aligning with Israel. Everything is about Israel. Well, we all know that it's not exactly what Trump meant, because Trump has always said America first, and right now, working with Israel works for him. What will happen if Putin will say very strongly, like he said about there is no collusion, then we will say, well, Israel is wrong there.
Yeah.
Will he convince Trump?
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure if Trump is really on the side of Israel as much as he thinks that right now it works
Netanyahu
for him.
Thinks. Or
exactly.
Trump
is a businessman, and Trump looks after his own benefits, after his own interests. And I do agree with Tammi here that he is someone that you don't really trust 100%, because you trust whomever was talking to President Trump last, whomever who had Trump's ears last. And let me tell you that if Prime Minister Netanyahu did trust President Trump all the way, he would not have visited Moscow or Russia at least 10 times for the last 2 years, because he knows that Russia and President Putin holds the key to the situation in Syria regarding the Iranians, as well as the future of President Trump.
Because some people think that
also in Gaza, because Russia and Iran are still talking, while the United States is not talking to Iran.
And everybody knows
and Iran money is involved in Gaza and with the Hamas. So you cannot ignore what's going on with who's really in charge here regarding what's going on in the Middle East.
Okay, throughout our discussion, we're going to talk a little bit more about the collusion and the meddling in the United States elections. Let's hear what was said at that press conference.
Would you denounce what happened in 2016, and would you warn him to never do it again?
So let me just say that we have two thoughts. You have groups that are wondering why the FBI never took the server. Why haven't they taken the server? Why was the FBI told to leave the office of the Democratic National Committee? I've been wondering that. I've been asking that for months and months, and I've been tweeting it out and calling it out on social media. Where is the server? I want to know, where is the server and what is the server saying?
Yeah, I did heard.
Якобы мы собирали компромат на господина Трампа, когда он приезжал в
We allegedly collected compromise material on Mr. Trump when he was visiting Moscow.
Когда господин Трамп приехал в Москву, я даже не знал, что он там находится.
When President Trump visited Moscow back then, I didn't even know that he was in Moscow. I treated President Trump with utmost respect.
Когда он приезжал в качестве бизнесмена, я даже не знал, что он находится в Москве.
Nobody informed me that he was in Moscow.
Yeah, so that was the part where I think Putin got visibly angry at some of the questions that were given.
Insulted towards Trump. Is he saying Trump is just a regular businessman? Is that what he was saying? That while he was just a businessman, he didn't even remember his name?
He didn't even know him. He didn't know he was in Moscow.
That's very insulting because
it's one thing, but not to know who Trump was or is, it's just unbelievable.
Did you agree with that? You think that's insulting, Bianca, to Donald Trump? That the president, that Vladimir Putin didn't know that he was in the city at the time?
Well, I think that no matter what he meant, Donald Trump is not going to focus on whether or not that was insulting. Sure. We've heard a very, very clear message from Donald Trump here, is that he wants to come away from this meeting and be able to point to it as a success. Yeah. He wants to be able to say, now things are better than they were before, and this is all because of me.
Yeah, that's what he said. He said, our relationship has never been worse. He said that then. And
yes,
then,
and then it changed in the last 4 hours. Exactly. That changed in the last 4 hours. Basically, this is Trump being Trump, trying to convince his base, talking to his base, telling them, look, guys, things are much better now. It was so dangerous and so bad with Russia. I came, we talked.
I saved the day.
I saved the day.
Everything is so superficial. Look at the meeting that took place between President Trump and the North Korean leader. Nothing came out of it, really. I mean, one piece of understandings that was signed by the two leaders, and we haven't really heard about the details later. President Trump is not a details kind of guy, and the same thing here. We don't know anything that was discussed really in detail.
Especially in the one-on-one meeting, we don't.
Yeah, but he sells us.
We'll talk about it.